I don't want you to take those arrows by yourself, Bart. So I'm gonna back you up here.
Thank you.
And I'm not gonna lock it in. It's hard. It is hard to three-peat. Like you said, we've never seen it. And yes, we absolutely go through the same cycle every year. Chiefs, we get bored with them. At this time of the year, we refocus our glasses and we're like, uh-oh, this is the eventual Super Bowl champion. The difference this year is the track that Mahomes has to go through in the Chiefs is going to be the hardest that he ever has in his career because, yeah, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson have always been good. This year, they are the best versions of themselves. Their defenses are playing better, specifically the Ravens, who have completely flipped. And not only that, once you get out of the AFC, if he's able to get out of the AFC, then he has to face one of the most talented football team in the league in the Eagles or the Lions or the Minnesota Vikings in the way that they've been playing on both sides of the ball. So I'm still taking the field here. I'm not completely locking it in. I think they are the team to beat, but they are not locking in yet. And I think that's going to be a tough track for them.
Yeah. So I'm not so sure that that's 100% accurate in terms of this being the hardest path. It all depends on how you want to look at it, honestly. Last year, facing the Miami Dolphins, who obviously I don't really think we're ever that in the first round at home in the bitter freezing cold. I mean, we already know Tua's history alone, but even if it was in warm weather, the Dolphins, I think they only beat one team with a winning record or one playoff team that year, and that was the Dallas Cowboys, which were also a very misleading team and not that good. So, you have that. And so really the big games were the Bills, the Ravens, and the 49ers. All three formidable teams. But it all depends on how you want to look at it, quite frankly, because I think going up against the Bills and the Ravens were definitely tough. And again, it depends on if you want to paint that road difficult and more difficult than this year. Because if you want to paint that road difficult, you'll be like, oh, Josh Allen, Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson was the top seed. They were amazing, and the Chiefs shut them down. And there you go. And then going up against Josh Allen as well. Josh Allen was balling, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you want to paint the picture of that being hard, or easy, I should say, and this path being hard, then you would say, yeah, the Ravens, like, what the heck was that game plan? I mean, my goodness, they didn't run the ball at all. That was bizarre, and they eked out a win. And then as well as going up against the Bills had a ton of injuries on defense, and then the receivers dropped the ball, and they missed a field goal, and then going up against the 49ers in the Super Bowl, you went up against Brock Purdy. I mean, who's Brock Purdy? He's might not even get a contract. Like, that's how bad Brock Purdy is. And obviously a lot of Chiefs fans are going to know Nick Wright, and so it's like Nick Wright has him like barely hanging on Mahomes Mountain as all of these various things, the muff punt, etc., etc. And so you'd say, okay, then that wasn't that hard. And so therefore you would say then this year is going to be harder because Lamar Jackson is playing better than he did last year. Josh Allen is playing better than he did last year. And if you want to say that the Lions or the Eagles or the Vikings are a better team than the 49ers, so it all depends on where do you think the truth lies. And I think I don't know, because also they have the first seed, the number one seed, so they're going to have that first round bye as well. So now they have one less game. So I just don't know if I'm going to say this path is harder, but this season than it was last season. But I'm not going to also pretend that last year was really exceptionally hard either because of how the games unfolded more than anything. I think on the surface you would say, oh, that's harder, but I'm just not so sure. If they face the Lions in the Super Bowl, if Greenlaw doesn't get injured, then you could maybe say, okay, that path was the hardest. If the Ravens actually just had a better game plan and didn't completely change their identity on the fly, and the Chiefs still beat them, then you would say, okay, this year, I'm not so sure that the Bills team is better than they were last year. Same thing with the Ravens. I think the Ravens offense is better, but I'm not 100% sold on that Ravens defense. If the Chiefs play the Ravens again, I'm not coming from the place of like, dude, they really got to get after Lamar because Lamar's coming. Like, I don't necessarily have that feeling. And same thing with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. I know the Bills beat the Chiefs, but I'm not feeling like, dude, the Chiefs really like. I just don't have that sense. And if they faced the Eagles in the Super Bowl, I would be like, I don't know. Like, the Eagles have been a really great team and a top team, but I'm not so sure they're this year's team. They're better than the 49ers last year. Like, I don't know. I don't have that strong sense about that. And the Lions, if the Lions find themselves in the play in the Super Bowl, like, they obviously are dead. What do they have, like 15 guys on IR? I mean, they're decimated on defense. And if you go up against the Vikings, you're going up against Sam Darnold. So those are all advantages Kansas City. So I don't know. I really don't. It is interesting that he kind of poses it that way. That last year was hard, or that last year was easier than this year. I'm not. It's hard. It's hard to kind of decipher, honestly. But the truth is, I'm not locking any team to win the Super Bowl this year. Honestly, um, it doesn't feel. It feels like we don't know who so many of these teams are. Last year, I really, really, really had a great idea who the Kansas City Chiefs were, who the Ravens were, who the Bills were, who the Eagles, the Lions, the 49ers. I just really felt like I truly knew because they showed us who they were 95% of the time. 95% of the time. This year, I don't know what this Chiefs team looks like because I said this now months ago. I said, what happens when they get healthier down the line? That team is going to be playing fundamentally more different than they were in, say, October. So this is a different team right now. The Ravens are fundamentally a different team than they were through the first 10 weeks of the season. This offense is playing better, more efficient, more dominant. The defense has stepped up and played better. Granted, a couple of those games were definitely against, like, not the best offenses out there, so it's a little bit harder to evaluate. The Bills have shown us some incredible highs. Josh Allen balling out, doing things that we've never seen, and then having games where you're like, ugh, that team can't beat the Chiefs. That team can't beat the Ravens. So it's just like 1 minute you're like, who can stop them? The next minute you're like, oh my God, will they beat the Texans in the playoffs? Like, I don't know. Will they beat the Steelers? I don't know. So it's just, I don't have a strong sense. I really don't. It's, which I love. I love not knowing. Yeah, they're going to win. This team's going to lose. Like, that's not fun. That's not fun at all. It does feel at this point like if, like, because if you're looking at the NFC as well, if the Chiefs were going up against the Vikings, like, it's hard to imagine, like, as much as I believe in the Vikings, like, you could still believe that the Vikings can win and will win even, but not so much where you could say with a degree of confidence that the Chiefs at the end of the day still shouldn't be favored to win, which again is not always the exact same thing. And in the Chiefs versus the Lions, it's like, if the Lions were who they were 3 weeks ago, then I would say, yeah, man. And then if the Chiefs were who they were 3 weeks ago, then it's like, yeah, man. Going up against that Chiefs or against the Lions feels like a juggernaut. The Lions feel less like a juggernaut, and the Chiefs feel less what's the word? Less riding that thin line as they had been throughout this whole season. And going up against the Eagles, to me, the Eagles are probably ultimately the biggest dark horse because it's kind of like, is Saquon going to go off for 200 and A.J. Brown going for 150 and Jalen Hurts balling out? Or is Jalen Hurts going to be uncomfortable? They can't get the pass game. They got to really rely on the run. Like, I don't know. Like, it can kind of go different ways. Are you going to see the Philadelphia Eagles, like how they played? It's just too difficult. Like, I don't know which version of the Eagles we would see. and you don't have that tradition, that unconditional confidence in Sirianni and all of that, in terms of like getting his team ready. And it's, if you would be talking about Spags going up against Kellen Moore and Fangio going up against Andy Reid. So, we've obviously seen a Chiefs Eagles Super Bowl, but at this point, both these teams are completely not completely different, but enough of them being different where it's would be pretty unpredictable, especially even also with the Eagles having different coordinators at this point. So yeah, I don't know. You can see at the bottom it says the Chiefs have a 14% chance to win the Super Bowl. ESPN Analytics has its second best. I don't know who's who's favored to win the Super Bowl then. Is it still the Lions? It was the Lions before, but I assume that changed. I don't know. Let me see if I could find that real fast. All right, well, I just looked it up, and nothing has changed since then that would change these odds. But it says the Chiefs have the best odds, so over the Lions. So I assume before it was the Lions, and now it's the Chiefs. So, yeah, because I don't know why it says second best. That's weird. It's not like it's one thing if the Lions played and they like lost or something like this is all recorded within the same couple days, so it doesn't make sense to me. And this was obviously after the Chiefs had already beaten the Steelers, so I don't know what would suddenly change those odds. But yeah, it's I think the other big advantage that the Chiefs have is the fact that they won't have to play the Ravens and the Bills. I think technically that's still possible if the Ravens lose to the Browns, I guess. And then I think technically the Ravens could still get like the 5th seed instead of the Steelers. But that's probably pretty unlikely. I think that's what could happen. Then in that scenario, then there's the possibility that the Chiefs would have to play the Bills and the Ravens if obviously both those teams win. And so that I think would probably make it a little bit of a harder trajectory. But now it's kind of shaping up best/worst case scenario for the Chiefs. It's like they're going to have to go up against the Steelers or the Texans. And the way how both those teams are playing, especially, it's hard to imagine that they even give the Chiefs a run for their money. I think it's possible the Steelers that they could get healthier. They've definitely been a little bit banged up. And I think, Russ still does have that potential to kind of get the job done. It feels virtually impossible for the Texans. Like, I'm not seeing, I just don't see where they have the manpower to do it. I just don't see it. Even though technically the Texans played better versus the Chiefs than the Steelers played against the Chiefs. But so again, it would then really all come down to the AFC Championship game. And then again, it'll end up being a toss-up between most likely the Ravens or the Bills. So that's what it will really kind of come down to more than anything. But yeah, I don't know. It's we are just so close to all of this, and it's going to be an interesting playoffs. I don't know where it's all going to go, but I'm definitely confident that it's going to be an interesting playoff series, interesting playoff year, should I say, not series. And it's I'm getting antsy for it. I'm getting anxious for it. I don't want to rush it, but it's just like we're so close. And box office, man, absolute box office. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Kansas City Chiefs? Do you think they should be locked in to win their 3rd straight title? I should also say this real fast, and I'll probably say this in another video. I actually don't care as much about the three-peat. I know people are really trying to highlight that as being a big special thing. I personally don't think so. I think if the Chiefs lost this year, but then won the Super Bowl the next year, in 25, I in no way would say it was greater. Like, for instance, if they won 3 years in a row, but then lost the next 2 years, or if they lost this year, but then won next year and then lost the following year, I in no way would say, if they three-peated, they'd be special. But since they lost, they're not. Like, that's not the way how my mind works. I actually personally do not think winning back-to-back or back-to-back-to-back titles is anything that special. I think in basketball, it holds a little bit more weight, but even in basketball, like in any sport, I really don't. It's like if the Chiefs played, had this big run for 10 years and they end up winning 6 Super Bowls, 6 out of the 10 years. If they three-peated one of those times and then all the other ones were kind of like every other, or if they just won like every other except for 1 year they did back-to-back, like it wouldn't change. I would still be like 6 Super Bowls in 10 years. As long as it wasn't maybe like 6 Super Bowls in the beginning and then like the last 4 years they just lost. But even then, honestly, like I personally, I understand why people like it and why people feed into it, but I personally, and I said this actually before the season even started, like I don't see it as being as such. Like it's impressive, but I just don't think it's if they lost this year and then the next year they won a Super Bowl, I'm not going to be like, they couldn't have won last year. Like that's just not how my mind works. I would still look at the Chiefs and the franchise and Mahomes and Reed and Spags and everyone, like I would still look at them just as high, in just the same amount as high of a regard than if they three-peated. Maybe if you get somewhere where it's like really extreme, like 5 years, then I could see, or maybe even 4. I guess 4 would probably, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. But I don't know. Back to back again, it's definitely cool. And if you're a fan of the Chiefs or a fan of any team that's done it in any sport, I get it because you're like, that's right, the last 2 years. So I get the feeling. I really, really do. But I remove myself from that and try not to think of like a fan perspective or even a player perspective. I just think like, you're not going to win every year. You know that. And if you're not going to win every year, then it's just kind of like, as long as we're winning with some sort of semi-regularity, it being back-to-back or having it be back-to-back, adding an extra layer to it, just not the way I personally see it. I've never felt that way, honestly. I really didn't. That's why even like when people talk about LeBron James versus MJ or anything like that, three-peating, like I think maybe multiple three-peats. So I think would potentially be more impressive. Like one single three-peat, maybe less impressive. If the Chiefs three-peat or four-peat, definitely four-peat would probably be a lot more impressive. But if they three-peat, lose for a couple years, and then have another three-peat, I think then that would make it probably more impressive to me potentially. Especially because at that point then it would most likely be a lot of different players, different receivers, different running backs, different O-line, different defense. Like enough time would pass where you would need new faces, which I think would probably be pretty impressive. But I'd have to think about it more, honestly. But those are just my thoughts now. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Kansas City Chiefs chasing greatness? Do you think they're locked to win their 3rd straight title? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I'd absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.